Okay, well, hello everyone. My name is, you've been told, is Cheryl Bagwell. I'm the business editor of the Breakfast Program. Sorry if you're expecting the dulcet tones of Fran Kelly, but she was called away to Canberra last night to cover some minor political event apparently going on down there. I don't know if anybody's got any news. This session is all about economics in the media. It's about reporting the economy, but let's face it, economics is politics these days and vice versa, particularly in the last 12 months when the government's efforts to save the economy from the GFC by throwing wads of money at the economy has intruded into every aspect of political discussion and political coverage. Even the issue that's caused the Liberal Party to self-immolate this past week, emissions trading, has been dominated really by the economics of the thing. The environmental story seems to have been lost in the debate about compensation to the big polluters and how much it's going to cost households and the economy in the end. I mean, these days everything seems to come down to economics, it comes down to the money. And who better to talk about the rising prominence of economic news than firstly Michael Stutchby, the economics editor of The Australian, who seems to have a front page story in the paper every day these days on that very subject. Now, Michael has been writing on Australian economic issues for national newspapers since the early 1980s. He's been the economics editor of The Australian since mid-2008, and before that he was the editor of The Australian from 2001 to 2007 after a stint as the newspaper's business editor. He worked for 16 years at our old alma mater, the Australian Financial Review, including as economics editor and Washington correspondent. And before that he worked in the Department of the Prime Minister and Cabinet under who? Which PM? Fraser. Under Malcolm Fraser. And he has a first-class honours degree in economics from the University of Melbourne. And our other panellist today is equally qualified to be here. Stephen Long is the ABC's economics correspondent. And you might remember in the lead up to the GFC in 2006 and 2007, he filed a series of reports warning about the growing risk in financial markets and that the world was heading for a global credit crunch, which indeed came to pass. He's been at the ABC for the past 7 years, first as the broadcaster's national finance correspondent, then as economics correspondent, and he provides reports and analysis for all the outlets, including AM and PM on radio, and the ABC TV's Four Corners and Lateline Business. And he too came from the ABC, from the Australian Financial Review. There he covered industrial relations, I remember, and labour market economics and the changing nature of work. He also worked for the Sydney Morning Herald and AAP and was managing editor of a specialist business publisher. And Stephen studied economics and history at the University of Sydney and journalism at the University of Technology in Sydney. So welcome to you both. Well, firstly, now, the Australian media gives a surprising amount of prominence to the reporting of month-to-month changes in economic indicators. They're not my comments, they were the comments of Ian Macfarlane, the former Governor of the Reserve Bank, and I'm not sure he thought all that reporting was necessarily a good thing. So I want to start with perhaps you first, Michael. Finance and economics has long escaped the business pages of our newspapers. It's now part of the mainstream. It's on the front pages regularly, particularly of The Australian. What do you think's driven that? I mean, what's behind that?
Well, I think there's a very long history, a very established history of economics reporting and journalism in Australia. And the job I've got, I'm economics editor of The Australian, and I've been economics editor of the Financial Review, and they're sort of traditional roles in Australian journalism that you don't necessarily get, say, in the US. Economics writing traditionally is not as sort of a forefront, opinionated sort of thing as you get here. It's a bit more of an English tradition, which you see today in the Martin Wolf, in the Wolf type, and it goes back beyond that. I took over at The Australian from Alan Wood, who has been covering it back to the 1960s. And if you get Alan Reid's account, the power struggle, the account of when Malcolm Fraser tried to saw off Billy McMahon after Harold Holt died and put in John Gorton, back then in the 60s, Alan Wood, my predecessor, gets a mention in the book. It goes back quite a long way, and it gets the Max Newtons into it. And at the Financial Review, I've succeeded with a couple of people in between, but Paddy McGuinness, who played a big role, of course, in the the Whitlam government. So there's sort of a big role of this sort of thing historically in Australian journalism, and it has played a role, I think, in terms of fashioning some of the economic debate in the 1970s and 80s, in terms of the building the consensus around the attack on labour market regulation and industrial tariff protection in particular. The newspapers, the Financial Review and the Australian played quite a big role in sort of fashioning that economic debate. And of course this is a little bit in the old days before the internet and the flood of information we have around at the moment. I think when you take that sort of strong tradition that we have in Australia of economics reporting, and you take it, and then you take the nature of Australia, and of course we're a small commodity exporter at the arse end of Asia, as Paul Keating used to say, and we are, we're very dependent on sort of things that happen to our economy. We're quite open, commodity, we're unusual in that we're a high income commodity exporter, so changes in the global commodity cycle, we're a bit more like a developing country in that way, really have a big impact on us. As well, I think you see in the nature of the institution and when you get up to the modern day, and you take the Reserve Bank and you take the monetary policy transmission mechanism, as they say, and one of the distinctive features of this downturn has been the way in which both monetary policy and fiscal policy, the stimulus measures, have sort of gripped. And there's a number of reasons for that, but one of the reasons is that the monetary policy from the Reserve Bank does go pretty much straight to the hip pocket with the floating rate mortgages. It goes straight in their pocket. Where in the US, Alan Greenspan's been pulled the lever, whacked it down to zero, flooded the thing, and he still had trouble getting the fixed rate mortgages down because it ran off the long-term government bond yield. So in Australia, what the Reserve Bank does, very much week or month to month, really affects people's hip pocket, and so it becomes very much more of a political thing, and so you get a lot of headlines out of all